good place to get started is to have a look at some of the experiment demos that are built into the app. So if you go to demos, and if you have not yet ever explored demos, you can select unpack demos. And in there, there should be a section called hardware. And in here, there are a few example experiments for interacting with EEG via a parallel port, a serial port, using a code component or the actual serial component. There's also some specific examples, for example, with EGI net station. So I have opened up the EEG serial component demo. And in here, there's a few different examples for how you can send an EEG trigger. The first example can be found inside the stimulus trials routine. This is an example of how you can time lock an EEG trigger to a stimulus onset. So here we have a stimulus, which is a simple shape that has an onset at 250 milliseconds. Below this, we have a serial port component. And if you select that, you can see that the start value of this is set to condition. And in there, we have stimulus, which is the name of this polygon, dot status equals started. That means that this is going to have the same onset as when the stimulus is presented. Importantly, do make sure that the serial port component is beneath your stimulus component. The other things you want to control in here are the name of the port that you are communicating with. My general advice for this would be to list your devices in your computer and try unplugging your device and plugging it back in again, and then you will easily see what's the name of the port that you are trying to communicate with. This is slightly different on Mac and Windows, so do have a look at our documentation on how you can explore that and let us know in the comments if you have any questions. Also in here, you want to control what's the start data. So what is the identifier of the trigger that you are sending? In this example, you can see that we have piped in a variable, and that variable is currently just being set in a code component at the very beginning of the experiment. So basically as a global kind of parameter. To show you what that looks like, you can click on instructions. There's the code snippet here that's called set trigger values code. And here you can see stimulus on equals 2. You could also pipe this in from a spreadsheet if, for example, you want a different trigger value for different stimuli that you present in your experiment. The other two routines in this demo show you how you could send a trigger once a key press has been made or once a mouse click has been made. These are both very similar, but let's walk through those. First of all, how do you time lock an EEG trigger to a key press event? Now here we have a key response called key_response. If you select the serial port component there, you can see here the start value is set to condition, and in there we have key_response keys. So it's referring directly to the name of that keyboard component. Time locking an EEG trigger to a mouse response is very similar to your keyboard response. So here we have a serial port component, and here you can see the start value is if the mouse is pressed in the stimulus mouse polygon. If you're communicating with EEG via a parallel port, the principles are pretty similar, but let's have a walk through those. So this demo experiment is set up pretty much identically to our serial port. You can see there is an example of how to send a trigger time lock to a stimulus, a key press event, or a mouse press event. And in each one of these, the concepts are very similar. You can see if you click on the parallel port component, for example, here, the start value is set to conditions with the stimulus.status equals started as the value in there. The thing that's a little bit different with a parallel port component is here you have a drop down of port addresses. And these are some common port addresses that exist. But what happens if your port address is not listed here? So what you want to do if you have a different port address to those that are listed in the parallel port component is you can go to PsychoPy Settings Hardware. And here you can find a list of parallel port addresses, and you can add a parallel port address here by selecting these three dots on the side and by selecting new address here, which is this little symbol here. Once you have added that new port address, you want to restart your PsychoPy application, and then that address will appear in the drop-down of your parallel port component. So that's a very basic walkthrough of how to interact with EEG from your PsychoPy experiment. Let us know in the comments if you've got any questions or if you've got any other content you'd like to request. For further help, please do use our forum, discourse.psychopy.org. But otherwise, good luck with your EEG experiments.